So, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. So the webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on the Haven Horizons YouTube channel afterwards. My name is Madeline McAleer and I'm the Research Training and Development Director at Haven Horizons. And we are an organisation dedicated to the elimination of domestic abuse and coercive control. We pilot creative prevention initiatives, and this 5 books that could save your life is one of those initiatives. So this is the closing event of the Shared Island 5 books that could save your life project. We've had 4 in-person moderated panel discussions on the 5 selected books. We'd 1 in Ennis, 1 in Dublin, and 2 that were hosted by our Northern Ireland partners, so they were held in Belfast. And on that note, I'd like to welcome Danielle Roberts, co-chair of Reclaim the Agenda, and Noelle Collins, Programme Manager from Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid. And also a warm welcome to our 4 authors who are here today, who my colleague Sarah Hart will introduce in a moment. Unfortunately, Mel B, who wrote Brutally Honest, couldn't be with us today, but she did send a video wishing us well and expressing her gratitude for the inclusion of her book Brutally Honest in the 5 books that could save your life project. And in addition to that, unfortunately, Kate Fitz-Gibbon, who co-authored the book with Sandra Walklate, has just let us know that she's had a family emergency and can't be here today either. I'll now hand you over to Sarah, who will moderate the discussion and, as I said, introduce the authors.
Thanks very much, Madeline. So, tiny bit of housekeeping, guys. The webinar format is as follows. Each author will have 5 minutes to discuss their book. I'll jump in when you're coming to the end of those 5 minutes, hopefully not too rudely. And then we're going to have input from our 2 Northern partners, Danielle and Noelle, on their takeaways about the project as it's concluding, as Madeline said. And if anyone has any questions, just pop them into the chat. Please indicate which author you're addressing your question to, and we'll try to get to as many as we can during the Q&A, which will follow on later. So I'm going to start with Professor Jane Monckton-Smith. Jane wrote In Control, Dangerous Relationships and How They End in Murder. Jane is a former UK police officer, criminologist, and an acknowledged expert in coercive control and femicide. Through reviewing hundreds of domestic homicides, Jane developed an 8-stage timeline which outlines the progression from coercively controlling behaviours to domestic homicide, and she's written a book about her research. So Jane, why did you write this book and what is your key message?
Well, I think I wrote this book when I started working with families bereaved through homicide, and I was listening to their stories, and although all of the stories were very different, they were all in another way exactly the same. Aspects were exactly the same, and I thought that was incredibly interesting, but something we weren't necessarily talking about. So moving on from that, I was researching cases of femicide as well and started talking to professionals. I certainly spent a lot of time looking at the academic research and all of the stories, no matter who they were coming from, and all of the research that had been done was really broadly saying the same thing, but it wasn't the same thing that was being said at a kind of a public level, a public understanding level. Some of the conversations that were happening, I thought, were almost the opposite of what the research is telling us and what experience was telling us. And being a criminologist, I wanted to apply some behavioral analysis and those kind of models to those cases, which is what I did. And I did that and published that as a research paper. But as we all know, research papers can be quite difficult to read, and they're not that accessible either for members of the public. So I really wanted to write this in a very accessible format that anyone would be able to read, because these things are so important about keeping ourselves safe, because the book is about spotting those danger signs when something might be escalating, but the signs don't always look the way we think they're going to look. And when I spoke with my publishers, certainly what they wanted to do, and where we were very joined, was we wanted to change the conversations that people were having about coercive control and domestic abuse and homicide, and try and challenge some of those really dominant narratives that it's all about the dynamics between the people, and it's all about violence, and people can then ignore perhaps really quite dangerous things that are being rationalized or justified as normal. So when the book was published, oh God, it was amazing, the reception it received. It was just absolutely brilliant. And certainly a couple of years down the line now, since it's been written, I've got people approaching me saying, this has literally saved my life, or this has given me the confidence to make me safe. And so it's been really worth it, probably the most important thing I've ever done. And here I am today. I'm sitting on this panel with other authors who've written the most amazing work, people that I was reading before I read my book. And to feel like that's all coming together, and here I am now on this panel, it's been absolutely amazing, because that means the conversations are changing. We're all having that impact in all of the work we're doing. And the more those conversations change, the more those old narratives, hopefully, are going to be thrown in the bin.
Myself at any point.
Oh.
Sorry, Jane, I was just saying there that that's very interesting. A lot of the stuff you say there, particularly about changing the conversation, because the books project, that's the whole point. And the other thing as well, as you said, that you identified that marker where there was a chasm between what was being said in public and the reality of what was going on. So thank you very much for that. We might come back to you later. So Lisa, I'd like to move on to you. Dr. Lisa Aronson Fontes, who wrote Invisible Chains. Lisa is an internationally known expert on coercive control, child abuse, intimate partner abuse, and sexual violence. As a researcher, professor, psychologist, and author, she is an expert witness in legal cases related to child abuse, sexual harassment, and intimate partner abuse. So Lisa, I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Jane. Why did you write this book, and what's your key message?
I think my motivations were similar to Jane's, and it's also a thrill for me to be with you here today. The idea of coercive control was just not generally understood or known, and Evan Stark led the way with his 2007 book, Coercive Control: How Men Control Women in Personal Life. But a dear friend and mentor, he never missed an opportunity to use the longest word possible and long sentences and so on. And his book is quite large. And my goal was to make these concepts accessible to the general public, because I thought they were so important. And the concept of coercive control helped people connect the dots between the various tactics, which may include isolation, intimidation, monitoring, verbal, physical, sexual, litigation, abuse, gaslighting, and post-separation abuse, and so much more. So I wrote my book hoping that it would be really accessible to victims, to survivors, to family members who were wondering what was going on with family members, with friends, for professionals, therapists, counselors, police, and so on. I think one thing that maybe distinguishes my book a little from Evan's, in addition to trying to have very accessible language, he forged the path for all of us in terms of legal insights and so on. But I wanted to discuss coercive control in the less extreme cases. So in your neighbor or in your family member, or perhaps you and me, situations where somebody who may have a great job could also be coercively controlled by their partner. I also made sure that I include a chapter dedicated towards coercive control in teenage relationships and LGBTQ couples, and also in the situation, which is less common, but it does occur, where women coercively control men. And it's been amazing for me to see what's happened in the last years since the book came out, in terms of the book and the field in the US. We're not quite caught up to how it is in Europe and Ireland and Scotland and some other countries across the pond. But coercive control is becoming part of the common understanding of domestic violence. And it's really important. It's changing laws, it's changing lives, it's helping people see how the different aspects of a relationship, which may have just felt wrong in some ways and like a not good relationship, how they are actually part of a pattern of one person deliberately dominating the other. And it has a lot of implications for everybody in the extended family and the children in the family.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, there's a commonality between what both you and Jane said there, in the sense that both of your books received great receptions, which just kind of demonstrates the great hunger out there for knowledge about this, because of the fact that the problem is so widespread. Thanks very much for that, Lisa. We'll come back to you again. So on to Luke next. Luke Hart is an activist. In Remembered Forever, Luke and his brother Ryan recount how an ordinary family was shaped by coercive control, culminating in the tragic murder of their mother Claire and sister Charlotte by their father. Luke founded the organisation Cocoa Awareness to raise awareness of coercive control. He has spoken and provided training in over 20 countries, helping professionals in identifying, understanding and ending domestic abuse. Luke is a White Ribbon ambassador and a refuge champion, speaking out against male violence towards women and children. So Luke, I'd just like to ask you what prompted you and your brother Ryan to write this book, and what was your key message?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so for me and my brother, to be honest, confusion and anger were probably the main thing. So initially it was, what on earth has happened? This doesn't make any sense. It felt surreal. And the other thing was, initially we thought it was a one-off, a random thing, you know, like can't be understood. But then we very quickly realized that whatever was in our father that did it was a spirit that was alive in the world, because we saw the media reporting, speaking as if he was writing it. We saw people saying things as if they were our father speaking through them. And it became, frankly, well, yeah, deeply concerning that something much bigger was at play, and we just couldn't figure out what was going on. So there was a lot of anger at whatever was responsible for this, and trying to wriggle our way out of confusion. So, I mean, I did quickly look at the book just the other day, and it was interesting because I wrote it within a year of the murders happening. So we wrote it in a state of confusion and emotional delirium, and it was written confused, right? Like, it was people trying to untangle a life of darkness. And it was interesting to read it, because a lot of it I probably wouldn't agree with now. And I'm like, that's not very clear, but I can actually see the threads of where my healing journey has come later, in seeds almost being formed, questions being wrestled with, even implicitly, you know. There's like lots of things I'm trying to touch at, but they're kind of forms in darkness. So that was what it was. It was also to create a legacy for Mum and Charlotte, because obviously they were silenced, and we wanted to share them with the world because they shaped us profoundly. We wanted the story about them. We wanted to help people. So we wanted Mum and Charlotte's legacy to be healing and salvation for other people. And for me and my brother, it was a way of creating shared purpose. So how do we bond after this? How can we do good out of the evil that's happened? So it was two young men, utterly confused, very angry, grasping and just trying to unravel and do something good with whatever's landed on our lap. And I guess, so the key message, I suppose, Ryan actually came up with a name, which was Operation Lighthouse, was the first name of the book. And actually, when he said it, it just hit, because that was the name of the police investigation. And it was almost providential, you know, like it just really struck us, that name. And we realized that how can we help people? The way, when you're a victim of abuse, everything's lies, everything's confusion, everything's darkness. And we realized the weapon that abusers have is that confusion, that darkness, those lies. So it was, what can we do? We can just be brutally honest. We can just shine a light on everything. Like the media tried to sort of like true crime, kind of indulgent in our tragedy. It was treated like entertainment. And they tried to go through all the details and speculate. And we thought, well, what weapon do we have to help? Well, we can just lay it all out. We can just lay it all out and say, here's everything that was going on. Here's what it was like. Here's all our weaknesses. Here's our flaws. Here's everything. This is what it's like. And using light to kill darkness, right? I mean, to sterilize all those lies, to just open up the conversation. So that was really the aim, was just to shine a light, reveal everything, and try and show other people a way out of the darkness, like a kind of initial tentative first steps out of utter chaos and darkness, and show people that there is a way. And even if we didn't know what it was at that point, but at least we had the hope to make those steps, and hopefully that could inspire others to move forward in their own healing journeys.
Well, I just before I move on, I'd just like to say that, I mean, you mentioned there that you and Ryan, for obvious reasons, wrote the book in a state of emotional chaos and delirium, but Operation Lighthouse has extraordinary clarity and is also very beautifully written, might I say.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was two engineers trying their best to write about
Well,
emotions. So
I have a stereotype of an engineer and it doesn't come across as that. It seems very philosophical. Madeline just asked me there, just to remind people, because they might have joined a little bit late, we're going to have a Q&A, so please do pop your questions into the chat and please indicate what author, to whom you'd like to direct the question, basically. So I'd like next to move on to Sandra. Professor Sandra Walklate co-wrote What is to be Done About Violence Against Women with Professor Kate Fitz-Gibbon. Kate actually can't be with us here today, but Sandra, we'd be relying on you to keep us up to speed. Sandra is Emeritus and Honorary Professor at the University of Liverpool, having held the Eleanor Rathbone Chair of Sociology there from 2006 to 2025. Since the early 1980s, she has worked on criminal victimisation, the fear of crime, and gender in crime. She is a member of the Advisory Board of the Observatory on Permanent Violence and Crime, the OPVC, in Portugal. So Sandra, on behalf of yourself and Kate, why did you write this book and what was your key message?
Thank you. Thank you for that really nice introduction. And also thank you for including our book in your series of events, since in a sense our book is a bit of an outlier in comparison to the others that have been speaking so far today. Our book is not about coercive control. This book started because of my, if you like, in part passion for trying to remember where we've been and how far down the road we've come and what yet needs to be done. And I've always found Elizabeth Wilson's book, What is to be Done About Violence Against Women, which was published in 1983, quite remarkable in the stance that it took at that time as an early intervention into the literatures on this field, since she recommended a holistic approach to answering the question, what is to be done about violence against women? And one of the things that I wanted to do was to actually revisit that agenda. And I persuaded Kate to join me, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. And to get the book published 40 years on. In fact, it was actually published in 2023. Publishers play this game by putting 2024 on, but it was actually out in 2023. Primarily because I think as the field has unfolded in those 40 years, policymakers, practitioners, contemporary terms, influencers have gone down the road of jumping on particular bandwagons of saying, this is what we do, that's what we do, this is what we do, and kind of forgetting the need for stitching all these bits together. So what the book does is in part trace some of those changing, the changing language, the changing nature of what policies have decided to address, you know, the emergence of naming laws after victims, all of that stuff is there in the book. And also, this is where the work I've been doing with Kate since 2016 comes in. Also, we wanted to actually look at the possibilities of the holistic response that was recommended in the 1983 book. And that was there for us to consider because in the state of Victoria in Australia, they had a Royal Commission on Family Violence that reported in 2016 that actually recommended a holistic approach. Thousands of dollars were put into reorienting the system of delivery in terms of policies and practices to do with what they call family violence, with the aim of keeping the perpetrator in view, with the aim of keeping the perpetrator accountable. And so we use the book as an opportunity both to review where we've been, to look at this experiment, which is what it was. Unfortunately, like most governments, if you like, express wish to do something about this problem. Our own government's going through the same supposed wish, keeps promising us with a strategy. We've yet to see it to address violence against women and girls. Despite the fact in Australia, the state of Victoria, there were thousands and thousands of dollars put into it, into the changing and reorienting the system, and some really good things have come out of that. Of course, what people tend to forget is it takes time. It takes time. 2025, they're still working at it. These system changes, getting interagency working, getting the educational processes working in schools and so on, is a long project. It does require commitment and it requires money. Mm-hmm. And we end by pointing to the extent to which actually misogyny, as Julia Gillard's speech, if any of you have not seen it on YouTube, the one that she gave when she was Prime Minister, is an absolutely uplifting 15 minutes for any woman in particular to spend her time on. Misogyny runs deep, and it runs in politics, and it runs in policy processes, it runs in organisations. So the work is hard. There are no quick fixes here, is probably the key message of the book. And even in those, say in the state of Victoria, 8 years on, challenges remain in actually securing that the delivery of that holistic vision. But that's what the book was about. That's what we wanted. That's the kind of message I think we both wanted to send out there. That doesn't mean to say there's not some good things that have happened. I have to say, coercive control was talked about in the 1980s. One of the things that really interests me is why it suddenly became popular in the 21st century. So there's kind of several different agendas shifting through the analysis in there. So I think that's it. I think I would say on mine and Kate's behalf, the story doesn't end here, and the story doesn't end with coercive control. In lots of ways, if a government of society is really committed to making a difference on the question of what is to be done about violence against women, then it's a long, hard road to go down. That's all I'll say.
Thanks very much, Sandra. And actually, we'll come back to you again, but one of the things you mentioned there about misogyny, all of the authors in your different ways have all addressed that deep-rooted misogyny. So as Madeline will have said at the start, this 5 books project has been Haven Horizons, and it's been Reclaim the Agenda, and it's been Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid. Danielle is from Reclaim the Agenda, and Noelle is from Belfast and Lisburn Women's Aid. So really, as this is the last event in the year's string of events, I'd really like to go to Danielle and Noelle. Danielle first, and just ask you a little bit about your takeaways from the project. So Danielle, over to you first.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks to all the authors. It was really interesting to hear your own reflections. We have talked about your books for hours at this stage, so yeah, great to hear it directly from you. I think one of the great things about the project has been the different audiences that we've reached. I think the books are an education tool and are a way of changing the conversations around coercive control and domestic abuse and violence against women and girls. I think for a lot of people, even reading these very personal accounts, often then seeing something in themselves, and that's where, you know, the inspiration, as Madeline said, around it being books that literally save lives. Throughout the events that we've had, the 4 in-person events, we've spoken to people at a book festival, so people who just read books. We've spoken to service providers at the Women's Aid Conference, activists and academics at the Reclaim the Agenda event, and policymakers at the Department of Justice. So we've really covered a broad spectrum, and I think it's relevant for everybody that's attended, because we know that coercive control and domestic abuse can happen to anyone. You know, it happens across regions, across classes, across ethnicities, across sexual orientation. So I think the fact that we've got the message out to hundreds of people at this stage is really great, and I hope they do go on to read the books as well, if that's something that's helpful to them. Changing conversations is something that at Reclaim the Agenda we try to do through our Raise Your Voice project that we're a partner on. So that's really trying to engage with people where they're at and trying to change those cultural narratives. And I think books are a way that we can get that in. You know, it's not a PowerPoint presentation. It's not you know, horrendous headlines. It's something a bit different, like particularly I think the memoirs, because they are personal, and the one that I always talk about is Mel B's book, because somebody might pick it up because they're interested in the Spice Girls, and then they might realise something along the way. So yeah, I think using every tool that we have to try and educate people and change conversations is what we're going to need to do to get to a stage where we're really tackling the problem.
Yeah, and I think the memoirs are great, but I think with the 5 books, the balance of the different books was really good in terms of you've got experiential knowledge, and then you have more academic knowledge and theory. But like even with the theoretical books, what stands out with Jane's book and Lisa's book and Sandra and Kate's book is that they're all very accessible, which is just great. So Noelle, how about you? What are your takeaways as we come to the end of a long but very fruitful and kind of interesting year?
Well, I have to say it was very enjoyable, and it was an honour to highlight all of your work. It's been great hearing from yourselves today. I think it was a very unique way of raising awareness and starting conversations, and we certainly did that. I suppose one of the events that really struck me was the first one, which was the Ennis Book Festival. So people weren't there because of the topic of domestic violence. We had the first slot. And I was really overwhelmed at how many people actually disclosed and became upset because of this had brought so much up from, I must say, your books flew off the shelf that day. And we had disclosures at every event, and we would be used to that happening. But I think particularly with the Ennis one, it was particularly a high number. I suppose for me, it was the cross-border element that was really useful in this project, because it highlighted the differences of legislation, it highlighted the differences of, so for instance, in the north we had DHRs, which don't happen in the south of Ireland. The south of Ireland are on their 3rd Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. We're on our 1st in the north. So
Noelle, you might just explain there what a DHR is before.
I'm sorry, a domestic homicide review. I suppose, and we had great discussions around differences in legislation, and you know, and looking for parity across both jurisdictions is something that the books helped to bring to the forth. I probably highlighted Jane's book more so than others because I see it working directly with women. This is a book that lots of our staff and workers within Women's Aid would use. It's also used very much in domestic violence homicides as a pattern of, you know, a woman's journey, let's say. in working with women, it can be used as a risk assessment tool. So yes, I would have highlighted that. In saying that, I think Lisa's definition of coercive control was really, really good, because it did simplify it. And I think at times coercive control has almost become the buzzword around for the last couple of years. So I really like that. Again, look, I think, you know, your book is from the heart, and, you know, it's about your experience and your personal experience. And I always think that it's home. So to wind it up, I think that this was a really, really useful project, one that was very different, but also it was very pleasurable. So thank you all.
That's great to hear, Noelle. You could have tanked us there and really gone for the juggler and dropped in some bombshell that you were glad to see the back of us. So very relieved to hear that. Now, Madeline, I want to ask you about the books and your feelings on the project and how you came up with it, really. Are you there, Madeline?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, here you are. Great.
Yeah. I suppose the 5 books that we're discussing today, well, we've just briefly referred to Brutally Honest. I'm not sure if Katerina is there. She's still spotlighting you, but that's okay. The 5 books came from the 75 books that Haven Horizons over the last 5 or 6 years have donated to Libraries Ireland and Libraries Northern Ireland. And out of those 75 books, we did spend quite a lot of time trying to select, I suppose, 5 books that would work for the project. And given that the aims we had for the project were around helping have that all-island conversation about coercive control and what it really was, that it wasn't this incident model, it was this progressive pattern of coercively controlling behavior that was a strategy, and how did we get that message across. And that's why I think Jane and Luke's book and Brutally Honest, why they worked so well for that. And I think Invisible Chains, to me, is the book, in fact, is the book that really started this project, because I loaned it to a woman who came in to talk to me, and she was very confused. And I said, look, maybe read this book. And she came back with the book and she said, I think that book saved my life. And I don't know, a couple of days later, I thought, you know, because I've always been a reader, and I thought, could a book save a life? And of course a book could save a life. And so that's what started me thinking. So then I started doing this as a talk, you know, when I was asked to go somewhere to talk about domestic abuse and coercive control. I actually chose 5 books and talked about them and recommended them. So, and what we wanted to do was choose 5 books that were written in a way that would resonate with the general public. And Sandra is right. What's to be Done About Violence Against Women is the outlier, because I deliberately put that book in because our organisation is about prevention. It's about what do we need to do collectively to end domestic abuse and coercive control. So I selected that book because it was referencing the title from the book 50 years ago and saying, well, what have we done? What's still to be done? And in fact, statistics would say that perhaps there is still the same level, that, and in fact, perpetrators are getting younger and victims are getting younger. So I feel that the books have actually put the spotlight on coercive control, and what someone mentioned, dispelling the myths around domestic abuse and coercive control. So I think that these 5 books have allowed us to achieve our objectives. And to say as well that the great thing about the books is that they're also available in audio and ebook. from the National Library Service in the Republic of Ireland. And people can go on our website and see the full 75 books listed there. And
Okay.
havenhorizons.com.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to you at the end as well, Madeline. Just want to kind of ask some questions now. So I have a question for Jane, which is, what can we do as a society to prevent domestic homicide? Jane, you're muted, I think. Hi.
Sorry about that. I was just thinking about what Sandra was just saying, you know, this is a long game, so there are no quick answers to this. But obviously, having written the book that I did write, I think that we need to understand what it is first, because at the moment, especially when we start talking about criminal justice systems and professional organizations, the narrative is often going off in the wrong direction and can be misleading around, certainly misogyny has been brought up today. We kind of say that in this country, at least, misogyny doesn't exist. I'm not saying that researchers or campaigners are saying that. I'm saying there's a lot of arguments that, you know, feminism's reached or the levels that it needs to reach. So that's one thing. There are some truths that we need to acknowledge. But there are also, in preventing homicide, we have to understand why it's happening. And it's not happening because people lost their temper. It's a lot more complicated than that. And we have to understand those behavioral patterns that are pushing that. And once we start to understand them, then we can start to protect ourselves. But if we're just going to continue talking about domestic homicide as if it's a crime of passion, nothing's ever going to change.
Yeah, does it ever frustrate you, that idea that people still persist? And actually, I'll have a question for Luke about that in a minute, but persist in seeing it as a crime of passion.
For me,
yeah,
it makes me absolutely furious, because it takes any kind of culpability away from the perpetrator. And as we know, most of these homicides are planned. So we can't say that they're happening in the moment because of some proximal provocation. We have to accept that largely because of misogynistic beliefs, these things follow a pattern and escalate and escalate. And if we can intervene and if we can disrupt, then at least we've got a chance of preventing some of these homicides.
Yeah. So kind of following on from that about something that makes you furious, Luke, question for you. I suspect that the link here by me mentioning furious, I suspect this might get you. How do you think the media currently report on domestic homicide and coercive control, and have things changed satisfactorily as far as you can see?
Good question. So, I mean, one of the things that struck me was just pride. So, like, we live in a very arrogant age anyway, but like the media just think they know everything, and they're like, oh, we know what's happened here. Here's the story template. We'll just force fit the facts in some, like, you know, like Procrustean bed thing, like chop the legs off, oh, it fits, brilliant. It's like, no, you've just massacred what's actually happened. Like, reality's been destroyed to fit your story. So that was really, really irritating. There's just a sheer arrogance. It wasn't like, there was no questions. It's like, oh no, we know what happened, this happened. It's like, no, you should have been asking questions. Like, and the thing, I mean, I've got a lot of problems with a lot of things, but our culture has just degenerated into entertainment. And you see that with tragedies. People just glorify in your tragedy as if it's just some true crime episode. And actually, culture is for the edification of human beings. It's supposed to build our character. It's supposed to teach us how to love, to form our heart, to shape us into full human beings. And our culture is degenerate. Like, it doesn't do that. It's just random pleasures and advertisements and like interesting glory little stories here, there. So the media doesn't function the way it should. And like the thing that struck me and my brother is that the media is there to tell stories. That's what it does, right? Like, it's there to tell us about reality. It's there to convey the truth. It's there to give us stories that we live in. And those stories are supposed to resonate with us. And they're supposed to, when we read a story about domestic abuse, reveal to us the domestic abuse in our own life. And if we read a story like Ron and I did about domestic abuse and think, oh, that's something else, well, it's not worked, has it? The media are there to educate us, to reveal reality to us, to teach us. And the amount of stories that I saw on domestic abuse and never connected my situation to it at all, that's a profound failure of the media to represent reality, to tell the truth, to edify me as a citizen, and to convey information in a genuinely uplifting manner, like rather than just entertainment. So the world's not a good place anyway, but the media are leading the downfall, frankly. And I don't know if it's getting, there's little bits and pieces, but I think there's a general failure, if I'm honest, metaphysically, where people just don't understand what evil is anymore. And you see it passed off in all kinds of trivial ways. Like it's just mental health. It's some deterministic thing, or it was poverty, or this thing happened. So it caught, like, no, like evil is a free choice. It's not deterministic at all. Like people can have very bad upbringings and do great good. People can have great upbringings and do tremendous evil. And I do think that our society is grappling metaphysically at like, what on earth is going on? Like, what's the cause of evil? What is the root problem of evil? And they simply don't know. We don't have a narrative for it anymore. So they use all these strange stories to kind of evade the question. And actually the stories mask reality. And I think we all need to do a better job, frankly, just trying to speak the truth. And I think the media could, rather than force fitting a fake story, is just ask people who know, like what happens generally, like talk to Jane, lay out the domestic abuse homicide, talk to the charities that understand and say what generally happens in these circumstances, and ask questions and stop forcing like nonsense stories and agendas. I think is something that I would say.
Yeah, you've touched on a lot there. As someone who works in the media myself, I mean, I know that there's this pressure to fill in, to get bums on seats, to get people to buy papers, but and you talk about the sort of the entertainment being one of the motivators, but I think all of you in your different ways in your books touch on the misogyny thing. There's a deep in the substratum, there's this kind of unspoken resistance, which is related to kind of a cultural misogyny. Now I have a question here, for Sandra, and it's from Martina. In terms of rehabilitation, is it possible for perpetrators or not, or has research been found that speaks to that?
Rehabilitating perpetrators, I think.
Yeah, is it possible?
Yes, it is. Though again, this is a tricky question to answer because there are so many different projects claiming to work with men, and looking for systematic evidence that's available about what works and what doesn't work is really tricky, because a lot of these projects have different, if you like, client groups, different purposes, different elements to them. But I think one has to be optimistic about that it is possible for men to change, as it is possible for us all as human beings to behave otherwise, should we choose to do so. And there are projects that make those claims. I mean, there's some work currently available from David Gadd, who's based at Manchester University, who spent 27 years working with men in this field. So there is room for optimism there. Don't ask me which kind of schemes work and which don't, because the available evidence is a bit more tricky to support those sorts of general statements. And again, it's another one of those aspects of the policy agenda that hasn't really been tackled systematically by any government, as far as I'm aware. Certainly not in England and Wales. It's bits and pieces here and there, subject to intermittent funding here and there. So
just before I move on to Lisa, I just quickly like to ask you myself, Sandra, has criminalising coercive control worked?
The simple answer to that is no. There's a long answer. I've done 3 projects on the criminalisation of coercive control since it was introduced in England and Wales in 2015. So that's over a 10-year period. And I think the most optimistic assessment of what's going on there is that it's a work in progress.
Okay.
Still a lot that remains to be done, both in terms of understanding, I think what Madeline referenced earlier on, the idea of a process rather than an incident. That is really, really tricky for criminal justice professionals to get their head around. And when they do, it takes a lot of time to pull the evidence together to document that. And the stats 10 years on just say that it's a very, very small proportion of offenders get prosecuted for coercive control, and an even smaller proportion are subjected to an offence of imprisonment as a consequence of that. So it's definitely a work in progress. A lot more interagency work needs to be done, a lot more understanding of risk assessment, and actually, fundamentally, a lot more understanding of just listening to women themselves. I can't say that strongly enough. If you just listen to women and their own stories, they'll tell you what's going on here. They know when their life's at risk. They don't need a tool to tell them that. They know for themselves. So going back, the simple answer is no. The longer answer, the more positive answer is it's a work in progress.
Yeah, and I guess a cynic might say, listening when you mention about process and time is money. So people will always go for the shorter route. So Lisa, there's a question here for you. Why are professional women particularly susceptible to coercive control?
I don't necessarily think they are. There is a certain kind of coercive control, which myself and a couple of other people have called romance fraud. If you Google romance fraud, mostly what you're going to come up with is online schemes to trick people out of their money, like catfishing. But there is also live and in-person romance fraud, where a domestic abuser will target someone with resources, with a home maybe, with an inheritance, with a good job, and target them to get at their money. Part of my book, Invisible Chains, came out of my own personal anguish. I wrote it 2 years after getting out of a coercive control relationship myself. Didn't know that term until after I was out of the relationship and read Evan Stark's book. And I wanted to create a book that people could flip through and say, does this apply to my relationship? So in the book, there is a series of questions that people can ask themselves or ask their friend, their daughter, their therapy client about whether their relationship is characterized by coercive control. And I'll say that I do think that what we call batterer intervention programs or intimate partner intervention programs can work, but they will not work for everyone. And we still don't know who they're going to work for and who they're not going to work for. In the US, we found that group programs work better than individual intervention. They should be either in person, or if they're remote, they have to be synchronous. In other words, everybody is online at the same time. They should be at least 26 to 52 weeks long. And they have to have a mechanism by which, if the people who are participating are not really showing up, and I don't mean putting their bums in their seats, as Sarah said earlier, but I mean really showing up and talking about what they've done, taking accountability for what they've done and are doing, and also having ongoing contact. I mean, the agency can offer ongoing contact with victim survivors to see if the abuser is acting up again. Those are some of the things that are required for those programs to begin to be effective, but they're not going to be effective with everyone.
Yeah, and obviously resources there again. So we just have a comment in from David French. David French's sister Valerie was the victim of domestic homicide. David French has a book for Valerie, which came out this year, which we will be including in our library going forward. David has a comment for Luke Hart. He says, thanks to Luke, thanks to Haven Horizons in gathering these books together. Ideally, each public library would have a section containing each of these books. He means the 5 books, and that they would be grouped together, which I think is an excellent idea. He says, this is to Luke, as a fellow engineer, I'd like to thank Luke for his analysis, particularly the explicit mention of evil. And David has a question for everyone. So that's all of you guys. So you can all just scrap with each other and jump in, and I'll try and separate you. David wants to know, do we know of any research on the post-homicide behaviour of perpetrators towards victims' families and surviving children? He asks this because David says, in my own experience, the perpetrators continue their abuse using their remaining property and child guardianship rights and do not express remorse or attempt to make amends in any way. Jane, I might go to you first.
Well, I haven't done specific research on this, but I certainly have got quite a lot of experience through the work that I do, looking at what happens post-homicide, and what has just been described there, I would say is pretty common. Somebody who is very, very controlling in their relationships is probably going to want to control everything in every relationship at some level that they're involved in. But of course, a lot of homicides have got this streak going through them of this person wanting to win, feeling a sense of injustice, feeling outraged by a separation or whatever. And I've seen some horrific post-homicide behavior where the family continue to be targeted. Now, that might be in ways of finances, or trying to get the home, trying to get custody or control over children, blocking the maternal family from having any access to the children. This, for me, has been really, really common. And I can see you nodding your head, Lisa, so I'm thinking you've probably had that experience as well.
Lisa?
Yes, I have seen that, and I want to illuminate a particular angle of this. California recently passed a law called Joanna's Law, which says that if there has been a death that is attributed to either an accident or a suicide, and there's a history of domestic violence or some reason to suspect domestic violence, then that should be investigated as a suspected homicide. I think that's really important because the behavior that David's describing in its most extreme could include making everyone think that the person committed suicide, or causing an accident or something that looks like an accident, and then attributing the person's death to an accident when in fact they're the perpetrator. I think that's a fascinating topic, David, and I'm sorry for your loss, and I really appreciate you raising it.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, I'll be handing over to Madeline in a second, but maybe Madeline could speak a little bit about that, about, it's something that we will come back to. Could I just say that we'd really welcome feedback on this webinar. So there's going to be a QR code on the screen which takes you to the evaluation form. And if you did have the time to fill that out, that would be great. The last thing I'm going to say before I hand over to Madeline is that, just on a personal note, it's been an absolute pleasure moderating the series of events. Learned tons, met loads of people, and it's been great to read the 5 books. I can genuinely say I loved all of the books for very, very different reasons, but most of all with the 5 books project, the cross-border, all-island, north-south aspect was fascinating, because whatever your politics are, and they're very varied, we live in an island, and being able to pool resources and exchange knowledge has been really fantastic. There should be more of that, not less of it. I'd also like to say thank you to the authors, and now I want to hand you over to the capable hands of Madeline McAleer for her closing remarks.
Thanks, Sarah. And I just wanted to maybe make a comment or two on what people have been saying. The first one is about what happens after homicide. And it reminds me that for a long time, frontline professionals would say things like, oh, well, they're separated now, so everything's fine. And of course, we know that's the trigger, and we know that post-separation, power and control is even worse, and it's just a change of venue, a change of stage really for the perpetrator. And I think post-homicide is the same. And I think, as Sandra said, their core beliefs, attitudes and behaviours don't change, so they just continue to practice that power and control. And I've always thought that the criminalising of coercive control, one of the things it's done, which I think is it's allowed conversations like this to happen. It's got an educative function. And the other thing that frontline workers tell me when they're working with women is that it has been really useful to be able to, for example, and I know somebody was talking about all this conversation about power and control started in the 80s with the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, and that was recognised back then. It's taken us 35 years to catch up and put an offence in place. But frontline workers say to me, it's been really useful to go around that wheel, and also now with the use of technology and all the different tactics, and say, this is a crime, this is a crime, this is a crime. And it's so validating for the women to hear, oh, our government recognises this. Now, in real life, actually criminalising and hold the perpetrator accountable is much more difficult, but it has definitely changed the conversations nationally and one-to-one with women. So I just wanted to say those things. And what I wanted to just finish off by saying is that I suppose the aim of the project was to have those conversations and to try and dispel myths and to ask, well, what can we all do to prevent domestic abuse and coercive control? And I certainly think from the 4 in-person panel discussions and from the inputs here today and from the content of the 5 books, I think we definitely have achieved those aims of, the raising awareness and all of that. But on a personal note, I have just loved this project because I love books and because these books to me could save a life, and to be able to be on this webinar with authors whose not just their work, but I know the activism that people who are involved in this area put in, and then to sit down and to write it and to make it clear and coherent that other people can learn from all that knowledge. I think that's fantastic. It's been a real honour to be part of the project, and also then just to say a little bit, I suppose, about Haven Horizons. We try to be innovative and creative around this topic and around prevention. So we have a virtual community of practice, which we would encourage people to join. We also do a weekly lunch and learn where we have experts, academic experts, frontline experts, but more importantly, I think experts by experience who come and do a very short input, and anybody can access that community of practice, and we will look at having people on the lunch and learn. So you can contact us at training@havenhorizons.com if you want more information. And of course, everything is on our website, havenhorizons.com. I think if we could just put the evaluation code up, we have 2 minutes left. It's really important for us to get feedback because we hope to continue these types of innovative projects and to get the feedback from people. If people can scan that with their phone.
And Madeline, if somebody couldn't scan it on their phone, because I'm only recently learned how to scan something on my phone, is there somewhere else where we could contact?
Yes. We'll put it up on our website, and we'll also email it out to anyone who attended. And I suppose I really want to finish. I mean, we've had lots of conversations, Danielle, Noelle, myself and Sarah, when we've been going around the country. And as we said, the different venues, we were in the Department of Justice for the Dublin event. As Noelle mentioned, a book club festival. We were in the Titanic Centre. We were at Queen's University. So it's been really, really interesting to be part of the project. And as Sarah mentioned, the difference between and I'm originally from Northern Ireland, but have been living in the South for 35 years. And that post-conflict impact, when Evan Stark came to Ennis, and I have a minute left, I see he went up on stage and he didn't hold up his book, which Lisa says, I didn't choose his book. People would say, well, why didn't you choose? I mean, he coined the frame, coercive control. I didn't choose his book for exactly the reasons that Lisa wrote her book. But the book he held up was Anna Byrne's Milkman, which was about coercive control in Belfast post-conflict. So I thought that was really interesting that he could pull that out and recognise that. So, I mean, thanks to Noelle and Danielle, and thanks to Lisa and Luke and Jane and Sandra, for making themselves available today and for their inputs. And of course, behind the scenes, the logistics of this project, and I just want to make sure I don't forget anybody. I mean, we're a very small, we hope, dynamic organisation. So therefore, people like Katerina, who's behind the scenes here, Sharon, Michelle, our volunteers, Deirdre and Donna, and we have an extra volunteer behind the scenes today on the technology, Rob. And in the earlier part of the project, I know people met Kathleen. I mean, they've all done Trojan work to make this, project what it was. And there's just a little legal bit because the project was supported by the Shared Islands Civic Society Fund, which is under our Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And we just want to say any of the ideas, the opinions, the comments in this event, they're entirely the responsibility of the presenters and don't represent or reflect the policy of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And just lastly, thanks to everyone who attended today and all of those who attended the in-person panel discussions in Ennis, Belfast and Dublin. And so we hope that you will join us for future creative, innovative projects on domestic abuse and coercive control, and follow up on our virtual community of practice, be part of it, and our lunch and learn. So Sarah, that's me finished. Is there anything?
That's great. And I'd just like to add as my parting shot that the Department of Foreign Affairs who funded us would never use phrases like get bums on seats for those who... Anyway, thank you all very much, and we will hopefully see you down the line at another event. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.